Good morning, everyone. If you're just now joining us, we did attach some handouts to the handout section of this webinar. You can access those now before we get started, and they're also available on our website. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Okay, Patty, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to Minnesota Housing's webinar on the 2024-2025 Qualified Allocation Plan. This QAP will set the funding priorities for the Consolidated Request for Proposals, or RFP, in 2023 and 2024. My name is Nicola Viana, and I'm the Housing Tax Credit Supervisor at Minnesota Housing. I'm part of the Multifamily Programs team, and our team oversees the RFP process, housing tax credits, and a number of other multifamily programs. And joining me today is Summer Jefferson, the Multifamily Programs Manager, who will be co-presenting with me. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few features of the GoToWebinar platform. First, your line will be muted throughout the webinar. I will go over how to ask questions in a minute. You have two options for listening to the presentation, which is indicated by this red box. And you can listen through your computer using your mic and speakers, or you may listen through the telephone. You should have received the phone number and access code as part of the webinar instructions. You can also find that information in this toolbar, in the GoTo toolbar. I'll assume that since you're viewing this, you're already found the listening features and can hear me. And if at any time you do lose audio during the webinar, try switching audio options or exit out and come back in, and we'll have staff on hand to assist you. As far as asking questions, we welcome your questions after Minnesota Housing presents. We plan to hold questions until the end of the presentation, and you can enter a question in the questions box. The toolbar on the upper right-hand side of the screen allows you to ask questions using that questions feature. And at any time during the webinar, you can type in your question and click send. Or at the end of the presentation, you can raise your hand and we can unmute your line and you can ask questions verbally. You will also need to unmute your line, but I will walk you through that part when we get to that point. We always like to start any presentation with our mission. So housing is the foundation for success. So we collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance housing that is affordable. Minnesota Housing provides safe, decent, and affordable housing throughout the state. And we offer products and services to help Minnesotans buy and fix up homes and stabilize neighborhoods, communities, and families. We also support the development and preservation of affordable rental housing through both financing and long-term asset management. And the agency has pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that helps stabilize the lives of some of the state's most vulnerable citizens. So thank you for being part of our mission to serve Minnesotans. Here's our schedule for today. We'll provide a high-level overview of the Qualified Allocation Plan, its purpose and how it fits into the Housing Tax Credit Program, and the request for proposal process. Next, we'll share policy areas where we are proposing changes. And last, we'll answer any questions that you have. The handouts for this session can be found in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar. You can see they're listed here. We have 4 handouts for you. These documents are also available in the e-news that we sent out on Monday, June 6th, and our website on the QAP webpage, which is showed here. We will record this webinar and post the recording and the presentation slides on our QAP page, and I'll show you where that webpage is at the end. So next, I'll provide a brief overview of the Qualified Allocation Plan and its relation to the Housing Tax Credit Program. For time's sake, this will be very high level, but we have staff and webinars that are available that discuss the tax credit program in more detail. During our consolidated RFP kickoff event in April, we provided an introduction to housing tax credits. And this recording is available on our website on the application resources page under the training section. And I'll show you that at the end of the webinar. So the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is one of the principal federal mechanisms contained within tax law for the acquisition, substantial rehabilitation, and new construction of low-income rental housing. And we use the acronym HTC. The HTC program provides tax credits to companies and individuals that invest in affordable rental housing, reducing their federal tax liability by the amount of the tax credit for 10 years. In exchange for this reduction in tax liability, investors purchase the tax credits and agree to keep units affordable to households at certain income levels. In today's market, a dollar of tax credit sells for around 85 to 95 cents, depending on varying factors like location and area market and analysis. The sale proceeds from the credits are then invested in new construction of affordable housing or acquisition and rehab of existing properties. HTC is outlined in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 42, and Internal Revenue Service Guidance. So the IRS requires every HTC allocator to have a plan for allocating credits to developments, which is called the Qualified Allocation Plan, or the QAP. There are certain IRS and state requirements for what must be included. For example, every allocator must provide preference for projects located in a low-income area that contribute to community revitalization. Minnesota Housing's QAP is made up of the QAP document and the self-scoring worksheet. These documents detail the rules for how HTCs will be distributed throughout the state, what types of projects will be eligible for a set-aside of credits, and how funding rounds will be administered, and what rules and procedures applicants in Minnesota Housing must abide by, and what priorities will be used when considering what projects to fund. Minnesota Housing's QAP is also the mechanism that determines the funding priorities for all the funding resources awarded in the annual multifamily consolidated RFP. All applications are scored according to the priorities contained in the self-scoring worksheet and then ranked based on score. Every point claimed by an applicant on a self-scoring worksheet is a commitment that is memorialized in the HTC or the deferred declaration. We provided training on the self-scoring worksheet and our scoring wizard, which can be found on our website. And again, I'll show you that at the end of the webinar. I also want to note that we moved from a 1-year QAP to a 2-year QAP in 2022-2023. We found this to be helpful in providing certainty and consistency for our developing partners and staff. This QAP covers the 2023 and 2024 RFPs, and we forward allocate our HTCs. So that is why you see the 2024 and 2025 HTCs listed here. So when it comes to the QAP development process, there are a number of factors that go into the changes we propose. We review previous years. We consider what worked well and what did not work well. We look at whether any criteria are having unintended consequences, whether we had a difficulty scoring criteria objectively, and how we can enhance the process for our partners. We track these questions throughout the year as applications are scored. We also look forward at what is on the horizon, examining our agency's strategic plan and how this should cascade down to our QAP. And we look at emerging needs in communities and around the state. We also look for alternative, improved ways to define our criteria by examining national best practices. And we incorporate community feedback from developers, partners, and the public. Last, we solicit formal public comments following publication of the proposed QAP through both written comments and a public hearing. This helps ensure that we meet the on-the-ground needs in the communities. And as we develop the QAP, we also revisit comments made in previous years. Now, I would like to turn it over to Summer Jefferson, the Multifamily Programs Manager, to go over the specifics for this QAP.
Thank you, Nicola. Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Summer Jefferson. I am the manager for the programs team in multifamily. So as Nicola mentioned, our team oversees the development of the Qualified Allocation Plan and a number of state and federal programs, including the Housing Tax Credit Program. The Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP, as she mentioned, includes detailed definitions and procedures for implementing the tax credit program and a self-scoring worksheet that assigns preference and points for developments that meet Minnesota Housing's tax credit program and our deferred loan funding priorities. These two documents are the foundational component for evaluating all tax credit projects and the funding requests submitted in the annual multifamily consolidated request for proposal. The 2024-2025 QAP, as Nicola mentioned, sets the overall 2023 and 2024 RFP funding priorities. For the initial planning for the development of the 2024-2025 QAP began in June of last year. For our last QAP, which was the 2022-2023 QAP, the agency had a significant amount of outreach and engagement with stakeholders across the state. We were able to make great strides and incorporated significant policy changes and made substantive changes to the scoring criteria as a result of the community input. These were implemented in the 2021 recent multifamily consolidated RFP. It was the first funding round to actually implement these new policies. We are really just starting to see the results of those changes. I'm excited to see that they are having an impact on the types of projects that were selected. But because of that, our approach this year was a more targeted and focused on areas we can continue to leverage the previous work, and then identify any areas to expand, streamline, and or clarify. Next slide, please. For the 2024-2025 QAP update process, Minnesota housing staff led and participated in several engagement opportunities to gather early feedback from a variety of stakeholders, including local units of government, community-based organizations, economic development organizations, other state agencies, funding and collaborating partners, developers, and then communities most impacted by housing needs. Our initial engagement began in October 2021 with a series of engagement sessions. We led and participated in several engagement opportunities from November through January in an effort to gather some initial feedback. And staff is proposing several policy revisions as a result of the feedback from those engagement sessions. Staff received feedback that aligned with several key themes and recommendations, including 1, to clarify the Equitable Development Criterion and application materials to better convey eligibility requirements. 2, to continue to prioritize economic opportunity for people of color and Indigenous communities to lead and participate in the development process by considering additional scoring incentives. The third theme was participants recommended some changes or potential changes to the geographic criteria to expand the definition to include tribal sponsored projects and provide more opportunities for projects that are sponsored by a tribe or located in tribal nation service areas. The fourth theme that we saw was that participants recommend changes to the criteria, the geographic criteria, and the RD set aside, which is our rural development small project set aside, to consider expanding the definition to prioritize smaller rural communities in greater Minnesota. The fifth theme that we heard was that we should continue to explore ways to just simplify the criteria and the application process for projects, including both in the high priority homeless areas criteria and our people with disabilities selection criteria. Next slide. The sixth theme was that we should continue to prioritize high priority homeless projects in the state while trying to consider and address any potential need and resource fit complexities. There is a need, what we heard is that there is a need for homeless units that are better tailored to meet the needs of the local communities. We should continue to prioritize projects that intend to serve people with disabilities while addressing the need and resource fit complexities there as well. What we heard is that there is still a need for units, but ones that better align with the proposed population and the housing and the household type with the planned resources and the needs of the local community. The eighth theme that we received during our engagement was looking at the prioritizing smoke-free policies to address the agency's goals of creating and preserving safe and healthy housing. And then the final one is to address housing barriers that impact survivors of domestic violence and modify our processes and protocols for the tax credit program to reflect this requirement as they pertain to VAWA, or the Violence Against Women's Act. Next slide. So I just want to give a brief overview of the categories and the criteria in the self-scoring worksheet. We have just about 23 selection criteria that are grouped into 6 different priorities or selection categories. Applications submitted are all evaluated for consistency with these funding priorities and categories. And then projects that best align have the highest opportunity of moving forward and being selected. These criteria are what generates the developer claim score in the self-scoring worksheet in our scoring wizard. and awarded score that we use to initially rank projects in the consolidated RFP in our other funding rounds. The 6 major categories are greatest need and targeting, which focuses on population being served by the projects. Serve lowest income for longest duration, which focuses on affordable rents for lower income tenants. And our preservation components, increasing geographic choice, which is primarily focused on geographic location-based characteristics such as the need for more affordable housing, transit, walk score, and prior award history. The 4th priority focuses on criteria that demonstrate the support of the community. The 5th, efficient use of scarce resources and leverage, is an economic criteria, or all of the economic criteria targeted at promoting efficient use of Minnesota housing resources, and include criteria looking at the level or commitment, leverage, and cost of the projects. And then the last criteria, building characteristics, drive towards certain aspects of a building, such as universal design and enhanced sustainability. Next slide. So we'll walk through the proposed changes. They were actually released on Monday, and as Nicola mentioned, they are available on our website. They are incorporated as a handout in today's webinar. And so we'll walk through some of those. Next slide. Here are the policy areas that will focus on permanent supportive housing, preservation. We'll walk through our geographic criteria changes, and then turn to equitable development and Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, business, enterprise. Next slide. The first modification is looking at supportive housing. Our first modification is in the greatest need tenant targeting category. So there are a couple proposed revisions to the permanent supportive housing for high priority homeless, or HPH, criteria. We are proposing to add language to address potential market issues that we have started to see in different areas of the state. The HPH priorities and incentives that we have had in place for a number of years have really helped to reduce the need for HPH in certain areas of the state. And we're excited to see, we're excited by that. That said, those communities still have an overall need. And so we are proposing changes that will help to ensure that projects are still able to serve the population, but based upon the needs of the local community. So this determination of marketability and whether or not the need for additional HPH units will be made during our application process in order to accommodate for any of the pointing uncertainty that may come, because that's done after applications are submitted. We have included a new clause that would require the proposed HPH units to convert to units rent restricted at or below 30% MTSP and maintain a priority to serve homeless households. We're also proposing a process change that will help to substantially reduce and streamline the application materials for the majority of the projects that include HPH units. One of the comments that we consistently receive, and it's one of the themes that I mentioned before, is in regards to complexity of the application process. This is an area that we continue to prioritize in all of the process and policy modifications that we do on an annual or a semi-annual basis to the RFP and the QAP. While there are a number of documents that we need in order to make a determination if a project is actually feasible, we also understand that the demand and the number of applications outpaces resources, that there are a large number of projects that will complete all of our checklist items and our application materials and will not be able to move forward. That places additional work and effort on the affordable housing industry. And it's something that we are really taking a closer look at. And in this case, this is particularly true for the supportive housing component, since close to 95 to 98% of all of the applications that we receive include some type of supportive housing unit. So supportive housing submissions was definitely an area that we wanted to pay close attention to this round and brainstorm ideas that would allow flexibility, but still help to reduce the upfront cost and the time associated with preparing an application. So we are proposing now to include 2 different application requirements based upon 2 different project classifications. The first is a primarily supportive housing projects, which is defined as projects that are 50% or more of the total units will serve HPH, PWD, or other homeless households. And then projects that are partially supportive housing, which is defined as projects with less than 50% of the total units will serve HPH, PWD, or homeless households. Based upon this new classification, the applicant will complete and submit different supportive housing application materials. The idea being that the project is a project that is partially supportive housing with a smaller number of supportive housing units would not have to submit the same amount of materials that a primarily supportive housing project would. So instead, additional documentation would be collected after selection during the due diligence process. From looking at the data of all the projects that we generally get on an annual basis, the large majority of the projects that are currently taking the points are partially supportive housing projects. So this change is expected to reduce the cost and time associated with submitting applications, and it will shift the focus of the work to projects that are selected post-selection. The second change in the supportive housing area is with people with disabilities criteria. We're adding additional language to clarify some documentation requirements to help ensure that projects are serving the intended population and are serving the needs of the local community. We are adding additional language to address potential market issues due to resource alignment. And then we are also proposing a similar streamlining change in people with disabilities that we did that we were proposing for high priority homeless, to revise and reduce checklist items. For people with disabilities, this would be applicable to all projects. Again, it is anticipated to substantially reduce and streamline the application materials for all of the projects that include units to serve people with disabilities. Next slide, please. And for the preservation selection criteria, we are proposing a couple changes to clarify, streamline, and then to simplify. The first is a clarification to the scoring dependency language that is incorporated into the self-scoring worksheet. So the self-scoring worksheet includes a lot additional guidance for each criteria that helps to explain how each criteria is allowed to overlap in the development. We usually have a lot of questions in TA regarding our scoring dependency language, and in particular, the language that is incorporated into the preservation criteria section. And we've also seen some projects still trying to overlap. So we've modified this language to hopefully make it a little clearer what our intent is, and to clarify what our intention is in this regard. We've also streamlined and simplified 2 tiers into one. So now it will now be called Existing Federal Assistance and Critical Affordable Units, or Tier 2 for preservation. This will allow preservation projects with existing state, federal, or local funding with rent restrictions that are 15 years or older and that do not have project-based rental assistance to receive points. We've also removed some of the overlapping unit restrictions or the scoring dependency that was previously there on this question, so that units can also get, the same units can also get points for source income criteria. So overall, this would be a net gain in the total number of points that these types of projects can now receive. Essentially allowing us to ensure that existing tax credit projects or any project with an existing declaration would receive priority and additional points in our QAP. Next slide. So then the last set of changes that I will cover will kind of highlight for our geographic criteria. We made some really significant changes in this area in our last QAP. So again, and our focus was to look for areas to clarify and then or to address additional concerns from the public. Location is obviously very important in determining what projects are going to move forward. So consistency in this area felt like it is appropriate, and we really don't like to make a lot of drastic changes in the geographic criteria. There are three major revisions I'd like to note. The first is our hold harmless provision. We will revise the hold harmless provision to apply this year to apply across the two different QAPs. So essentially, between the two 2023 QAP to the 2024 QAP, or the QAP years. This would allow the non-select projects that apply in the 2022 RFP, 2023 RFP to apply the methodology into the 2024 RFP. I'm sorry, the 2022 RFP to apply the methodology into the 2023 RFP. The consistency within the criteria for the two QAPs allows us to provide this flexibility for this round. This is another area that we've seen a lot of comments in that the changing of the policies can have dramatic impacts on the projects that are already being contemplated for multiple years. So we often see substantial feedback. So we are on this area. So we are excited to be able to provide this opportunity to applicants. We have also created a methodology guide this year. As Nicola mentioned, you can find it on our website. We have combined the methodology table and all of the geographic methodology into one document with a table of contents. This is one of our streamlining efforts to help make the materials and the resources a little more user-friendly and easier for you to access. The third change is to the workforce housing criteria. We are proposing to add additional language to expand the hold harmless provision and modify how communities are evaluated and updated on an annual basis for this QAP. We will continue to evaluate job growth and long commute communities and add in any new workforce communities with the updated job numbers that we receive. But what we're proposing is that we would not remove any of the current communities for the duration of the 2024-2025 QAP. This will help to accommodate for the fluctuation in job growth due to the pandemic, so that projects do not lose eligibility for what may be a temporary dip caused by job losses during the pandemic. And then we've also added some clarifying language to QCT criteria, just to make it clear that the hold harmless provision also can apply to that criteria. And then we've also incorporated language to also be clear that the submission of the Community Development Initiative Plan is only required for projects that are located in a QCT. The last criteria change from a geographic criteria perspective is in our rural tribal criteria. We are proposing to revise the rural tribal methodology to a 2-tier scoring category based upon the population of a community. This will help to ensure that there is balance between smaller rural areas and urbanized areas in greater Minnesota. With that, I'll hand it back over to Nicola, who will cover the last 2 remaining areas and then discuss some of the next steps in the development process.
All right, thank you, Summer. So I'll address 2 other proposed changes which are found in the selection category for supporting community and economic development, starting with equitable development, which was a new scoring category in the 2022-2023 QAP. The goal of this category is to center the voices, opinions, and needs of communities most impacted by housing disparities in the development planning process. The input from communities most impacted is used to inform the development team of how various project elements should be structured to best serve communities most impacted and provide a community benefit. So for this category, we wanted to add language to help refine and clarify documentation requirements. Since it was new last time, we want to make sure to provide a little bit more clarity. And we want to refine the requirements of the qualified stakeholder group. So we'd like to clarify entities that qualify as a qualified stakeholder group and clarify what we mean by community participation so that communities most impacted can be represented and provide meaningful participation engagement, and so that community voices are involved in the development process. And we wanted to add language to refine the requirements of the qualified stakeholder group letter that was submitted with the application. So definitely check out the red line version to see the exact words that we put in there and provide comments to us. Next, I'll cover our Black, Indigenous, people of color owned business and women-owned business. And so the goal of this category is to incentivize development teams to include at least one core member that identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color or a woman. We have seen great strides in this category since we first introduced it in 2018. However, women-owned business enterprise participation in the development team continues to substantially outpace the Black, Indigenous, and people of color-owned business enterprise. For this reason, we created a new incentive for diverse ownership opportunities by adding a new tiered point option for ownership and sponsorship and increase the total points available. We also modified the partnerships points by adding opportunities for more points in scenarios for diverse teams. So here is a list of other changes we are proposing. We're proposing to increase the development limit from $1,350,000 to $1,700,000. Hopefully I said that right, so you can see the numbers on here. This is to reflect cost changes and to help meet project needs. And that would be for both QAP years. And then we are also proposing some changes to the rural development and small project set aside, or the RD set aside, where we would like to increase the amount in the set aside from $375,000 to $425,000. and to increase the maximum number of units from 12 to 24 units to create more flexibility, opportunity for preservation, and to align with common RD project sizes. And then we want to expand the definition in this category to match the definition of the rural tribal methodology. So this rural development language is found in the QAP. It's not in the self-scoring worksheet. So those changes would be found in the QAP document. And then we have a number of administrative updates. And so we'd like to add language to allow discretion for supplemental HTC requests if a project was a partial allocation. Add language to allow discretion to allow additional extensions to submit carryover requirements. And eliminate any references to prior HTC forms that have become unnecessary, just trying to clean up the language a little bit and give us more flexibility if a form is no longer needed. And add language to clarify that administrative non-material modifications are allowed. So the QAP will be reviewed to clarify requirements and streamline. If you have comments on how we specifically can clarify requirements or streamline the information, please share that in your comments. So that concludes the summary of proposed changes. Next, we will discuss the next steps around the public comment period. We welcome your comments to the proposed QAP, self-scoring worksheet, and methodology guide. We look at these documents as first drafts, and they are subject to change. It does help us if you are specific in noting which document or selection criterion you are commenting on. And you can comment on several items within your comment, letter, or email. Please send us your comments by Wednesday, June 29th at 5 o'clock Central Time. And here are the ways you can engage further and share your comments. Next Tuesday, June 14th, we will be sharing a webinar with the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers and Minnesota Housing Partnership. We'll have much of the same presentation as today, but we'll go into more detail, and various Minnesota housing staff will be joining us. And then June 28th, we've got a public hearing, same platform as today, the GoToWebinar. So check the e-news that we sent out Monday, June 6th for more details and to register. Here are the ways you can share your comments. Since these are public comments, we will share all comments on our website after the public comment period. You can email your written comments to htc.mhfa@state.mn.us, or you can mail them to us at this address. You can also call our office if you prefer to make a comment by phone. Kelly is our policy and compliance analyst. And our preference is email, just so that it's clear and easy to save and put into the document list, but we will accept them any of these ways. So we will review and consider all feedback and comments submitted during the public comment period. Our timeline allows for careful consideration and review of all the public comments, including we'll have a second public comment period in the fall. So presentation and final action on this QAP and self-scoring worksheet are expected to occur at Minnesota Housing's board meeting in November of 2022. Here is our website. It's mnhousing.gov, and you'll want to go to multifamily rental partners located on the right. And then once you get to that landing page in the beige toolbar, go to the tax credit page, and then you'll find all the materials on this quick links Qualified Allocation Plan. And on that page, we list out all the handouts that are attached here, and that's where we'll post the the public comments as well. And then if you go to this tab, the Application Resources tab, the one to the left, the tax credits, that's where you'll find the recording of the Introduction to Housing Tax Credits and the self-scoring worksheets and Scoring Wizard training. But we'll put this recording and the presentation slides on the Qualified Allocation webpage. Here is our contact information. If you would like to share feedback on the QAP, please email this htc.mhfa email. And then if you have general questions, you can reach out to me, Nicola, or QAP questions, you can reach out to Summer. But if you send any questions, you could also just send to the htc.mhfa email list, and our whole HTC team will be available to assist you. So we have now arrived at the question and answer part of the session. So if you have a question, you can share that in a few ways. You can type your question or comment into the questions box, and we will answer your questions as they come in. For comments, we will acknowledge your comment, but we will we may not read it entirely. It just depends on how long the comment is, because we do encourage you to submit your comments to us via email so you can get that on the record. You can also raise your hand using the go-to controls on the right-hand side, and I will, or actually Patty, will unmute your line, and then you will also need to unmute your line, and then you can speak and ask your question. And then you may also email us a question after the webinar too, if you have a question that comes later that you think of. Okay, so I think that's all the information I want to share initially. I'm going to, so go ahead and type your questions in to the question box at this time. I'm going to keep the slide on this part here, just so that you have the information.
We have a person with their hand raised. Sue, I'm going to unmute your line. Go ahead and ask your question of the panelists.
Thank you. This is Sue Watley-Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of MICA. And thank you for this presentation. I thought it was very well done, and it's really nice to see these changes and clarifications that are happening. Really appreciate that there's going to be additional clarification on the equitable development. That's something that MICA has worked a lot on and is really working in the community to make sure that people's voices are being heard in the development process from the community, as well as especially people that are going to be utilizing the housing opportunities and how they're actually designed. And I also really appreciate the focus and target to make sure that in people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, greater opportunities in regards to the partnership and the investors. I think that that's a really positive direction. It's obviously, again, another piece that MICA has been pushing in the Qualified Allocation Plan, but to see additional points there to really expand the opportunities for our newer developers and our newer partners to be a part of these projects and develop those opportunities for them so that they can continue to expand and then be the key developer in future projects is wonderful. So thank you for this. Michael will be providing additional comments too. So thank you.
Summer, I don't know if you want to comment, but just thank you very much for that comment and feedback. We really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, for your comment. I appreciate the support and the changes that we've made. We really took the time to kind of learn from what we saw in the last round, and also the input from all of you to kind of make those clarifications. So yeah, we definitely appreciate the support and any additional comments that you, in regards to the changes that we have included. So.
Patty, is there anyone else at this time that wants to give feedback via phone? Or we also have a...
Although actually Sue has her hand raised again. Go ahead, Sue.
Thanks. I don't want to take up all of it if other people have questions, but I do have another question in regards to, I really appreciate the hold harmless clause. I'm still interested in trying to understand a little bit more about our interest is in the supportive housing units that are being funded, both that are less than 50% and more than 50%. Is the opportunity for folks that no longer need the permanent supportive housing or the services, but still need the affordable housing, the ability of them to be able to stay in the unit that they're currently in, and that then another unit can be identified as basically a supportive housing unit, but really making sure that folks are able to afford that unit, especially folks that oftentimes can be below 30% of median income. So just wondering how the language is being adjusted, or more points for making sure that people can stay actually in that same building if they choose to, when they no longer need those supportive services.
So I think this might be a question for Vicki, because I think this actually probably gets more into the long-term compliance of the projects after they're kind of through production, and how we kind of the turnover rates and how we kind of deal with some of that when the projects are completed. And Vicki, do you have anything to add or have any knowledge about what our current policy or process is for that?
Yes, well, people can stay in the unit, but it depends on how the rent is paid. If the project has project-based Section 8, or if the tenant gets a tenant-based housing choice voucher, they can stay, and if they can afford the rent. And so it really depends on how the rents are set for each unit. So there are oftentimes when, people move up, and they can stay in the unit, and depending on the development, the service provider can request another unit if there's one available that works. They can take another household. And we also have a...
Oh, sorry, Vicki. So my suggestion is that there be additional points for projects that are able to continue to provide that housing for folks when they no longer need those supportive services, and that they target the units that are at 30% and below to assist those folks to be able to stay in those units. Hopefully we will expand the housing choice vouchers on the federal level with different legislation that we're working on. But I think that keeping people stable is really critical. And I think having that opportunity to stay where people have developed relationships and connections with other people in the building and in the community is really critical for the long-term stability. And that's why MICA certainly supports more of a mixed income type of housing and using the income tax averaging with the low-income housing tax credit wherever folks and developers feel that they can make that work, so that we can keep people as they move out of the need for supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, is to be able to actually stay in place, so they have that equity in place.
Great, thank you, Sue. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, so Summer, I'll turn it over to you to ask and read them and answer those questions.
Yep. And I'm seeing one question. Do you prefer comments in the red line format you're using on the self-scoring worksheet? If you have, we present, or we actually put out the red line so that it's easier for folks to see the changes. Otherwise, they get a little buried in all the documentation. I also know that some of the changes in the HPH section this round are there's a lot of editing, and that's just showing us taking out a lot of the upfront requirements and signaling that those things would be kind of be in the checklist or be in post-selection. But whichever way, there's no preference per se of how you submit your comments. If you have specific language changes, it might be helpful for you to submit it in a red line format, if that makes sense. If you're recommending some language, taking what we've proposed and adding your language as the red line that you're specifically trying to point to, or making a specific language recommendation. So hopefully that answers the question. If you have any other follow-up or any other questions about just the comments, you can raise your hand or add additional question in the question box. That is the only question that I'm seeing.
Oh, I see another one. Summer, I'll read it. Just save your voice and you can respond to it if you like. So I'll read it here. My name is Clarissa Horn and I manage a housing stabilization company. Our goal is to address the rising cases of homelessness throughout the state and cities across Minnesota. We provide housing transition services as well as housing stabilization. We focus on locating affordable housing based on the needs of our clients, like income, housing needs, and area of interest. I would like to know if more properties will be affordable to individuals who are on a fixed income or low income or project-based properties.
Yeah, I think I can address that. Thanks, Clarissa, for your question. I think based upon in our last QAP, the 2022-2023 QAP, we made some substantive changes to add deeper rent targeting threshold requirements. So there are currently requirements for all projects that at least 2% of all of their units have to be at or below 30% rents. And then at least 3% of their units the rents have to be restricted at or below the HAP payment standard. For that policy, we, again, because we've only seen it implemented in the RFP round, we need to get more data just to see the impacts to projects. So there was still our round 2, we have our 4% only projects that we're still in the middle of the round for those. So we needed more data in order to make any modifications. So that will remain the same. I can also say that we did a really in-depth analysis of Minnesota Housing's payment standards, of Minnesota Housing projects, to understand how they compare to the payment standards in the state for the HRAs across the state. And so those initial numbers were very positive, and we're still doing more analysis to look at all of our portfolio, but thinking that long term that would also inform any policy adjustments to the deeper rent targeting requirement. We also incorporated a serves lowest income, other tiers into the serves lowest income requirement, and that requirement is essentially where developments can agree to restrict rents for units to a lower rent, 30% of MTSP or 50%. Last year, we added tiers for 30% in order to help to reduce rents for cost burden households. We added additional geographic criteria that focused on the need for more affordable housing in areas and looking at cost burden areas. We've always had our preservation and our rental assistance criteria, which helps to incentivize projects that have existing rental assistance or projects that are able to attain rental assistance and subsidy, new subsidy and provides additional points for them so that we can prioritize projects that are able to ensure that the rents are affordable for the residents. Hopefully that answered your question. If there's any follow-up, if you can either raise your hand, or I'm happy to also connect more offline.
Thank you, Summer. Okay, this is one last call to ask questions. You can either raise your hand and we'll unmute your line, or you can type your question in the box.
And there is I see another question. Are reduced energy costs becoming a higher priority these days with fuel costs on the rise? Thanks for the question. I think obviously development costs are something that the agency is monitoring for existing projects and projects that we will see that will come in for the 2022 RFP, and how that segues with some of our policy criteria. It's obvious, it's something that when we released the 2022-2023 QAP, it was released in 2020. All of this is all new market information that is happening on an ad hoc basis, but we are taking it all into consideration for projects that have currently taken sustainability points, or and even into the future. We didn't propose any changes in our enhanced sustainability criteria or innovative construction techniques, because they are, again, relatively new. We have not really seen them implemented. Projects have taken points for them, but they are still in the process. A lot of them have not even made it to the construction process, or even where their construction documents are complete, to understand if there is a cost impact. So it's something that we're monitoring and we're aware of in this environment, but we haven't made any decisions at this point, just because it'll be more of on a project by project basis. And as we continue to look at the different QAPs, hopefully we're in a different position within the next couple years, and that we will see some of this level off, and that we could potentially be back where we were before the pandemic, but it is something that we're monitoring.
Thank you, Summer. And I realize we are at time. It looks like we have maybe one more question. Someone wants to speak, maybe Sue. We can hang on the line for a few more minutes, and we'll leave the webinar open for 10 more minutes if you have other questions you want to submit, so that we can get them all captured in our system. Sue, did you want to make another comment or ask a question?
Just real briefly, we'll be commenting. We think that there should be additional points for energy efficiency, and we do think that there should be an increase in the percentage of units at below 30% and the HAP standard. So we think that the need for affordable housing at those levels are so great that we need to make sure that our limited resources are really targeted at that. So Micah will be making comments in those areas. Thank you.
I will also say that majority, in that regard, that the majority of the RFP projects that are more, they exceed that threshold generally, and so it's because of the other priorities that are incorporated into the QAP, where they're definitely more, our projects are very mission driven, and the competitiveness of the RFP does push everyone to push in the criteria to take additional points. So I just wanted to also say that. But thank you, Sue. We definitely look forward to your comments. I think that concludes all of the questions that I see.
Yes, me too. So I've got the screen up here for written comments. Please email or mail them to us or call us, and please do so by June 29th. Thank you so much for your time today and your partnership, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much. And Patty, you can leave it on for a couple more minutes in case someone's typing a question, and we can capture it later.
No problem.